Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home this week. I'm very happy to be here. And this week, this is an interview and a podcast I've been wanting to make happen for a very long time. And I'm very, very happy that this is happening. I am welcoming this week guest Mark Vicente, and he is someone you may have heard or seen in the past already because he was featured on the documentary The Vow about Keith Raniere's NXIVM cult. And he was a survivor of that group and was featured prominently in the documentaries and work and articles, many, many, many articles on that topic. Like Scientology, NXIVM was something that absolutely fascinated people when it blew up. And the leader of that group was prosecuted by the FBI and sent to jail, where he is currently languishing away for the rest of his life. And quite frankly, I'm quite happy about that. It's very rare that we see the justice that we want to see enacted against cult leaders who have, spent years abusing and financially taking advantage of their members. And so this was a case where we actually saw justice take place. So, Mark, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a long time coming because we've been liking each other's stuff on social media, but we've never actually had a conversation.
Exactly. We really jumped right into it. We've talked for the first time, for 5 minutes. So, because I wanted to make this very organic, and I wanted to tell you first off, before we get into anything, how much I have admired you from afar since this whole thing blew up with NXIVM. Because your work, the demeanor with which you approach this, the calmness with which you explain it, and yet the quite awful experiences that you not only went through, but documented. That is what is so interesting and in a way rare, but I think as we move forward in time, we're going to continue to see more and more, I don't know what to call it, digital gurus, like people who want to be filmed and documented every step of the way. And Keith Raniere was one such person. I think we're seeing others, and we're seeing like that Larry, the university guru guy who took over the lives of 5 or 6 college students for 10 years, and all of that was documented. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but
no. You're right.
You're first off, for anybody who happens to be watching this who doesn't know what I'm talking about or doesn't know your background, can we give a quick rundown on who you are and what your experiences were there?
Yeah, so I'm originally from South Africa. My dream was to make movies, and I've been in the industry for a long time, and I was also seeking for answers for what is reality, all the usual stuff. And I made a film in the early 2000s called What the Bleep Do We Know? It became kind of huge. It was a big new age movie. And the cult that I then later joined, they saw the movie. They were like, we want this guy to come work for us. And they lured me in a very, very smart way. They basically said, we can help you make the movies you want to make. We have the resources. We have the finances, so
that is smart.
Jets and oh my God, that was like crack cocaine for me. Yeah. And so, I was great. This is fantastic. I'll spend some time looking at your sort of, intellectual model. And I did, and some of it blew me away, but some of it was very tedious, but a good deal of it really blew me away. And slowly over time, over a period of about a year, I sort of got more and more inducted and ended up spending 12 years there. And the last few years, I could see something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what it was. And I kept on going to the leader, Raniere, and saying, listen, I think this is going on. I think that is going on. There's a psychopath in the organization. And he was like, oh, really? And basically just blowing smoke up my ass. Am I allowed to swear on this one?
Absolutely.
Sure. All right, guys, blowing smoke up my ass. And then the big revelation finally, through the help of my wife, was that he was doing awful, awful things. And he was in actual fact the one with the pathology. And then, one of the first steps we did is try to get people out. We went to law enforcement. We started, this was in 2017. I was talking to everybody. I was talking to police. I was talking to the FBI in different places. I was talking to the DEA. I was talking to investigators, cops, for months and months and months, and I couldn't get anybody's attention. We all had different jobs. My job was law enforcement. We couldn't get anybody's attention. And so finally we thought, well, fuck it. Let's just go to the New York Times and blow this whole thing up. So sort of April 2017 is when my big wake up happened. The organization started like exploding in June, and then October of that year is when the New York Times article came out, and that is what finally got the attention of law enforcement.
Right. And it happened to, timing wise, coincide well with the Me Too movement.
Yeah. In actual fact, I remember talking to the journalist all the time that wrote the piece and said, like, we need to get this out. This, yeah, but it's Harvey Weinstein and Me Too. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. We need to ride that, And so we were able to ride the Me Too movement. And we were very lucky. We got, because honestly, we'd spoken to a number of different potential prosecutors. Mm-hmm. And the FBI in Albany were aware of this. For years, they'd been aware.
That was what I talked with Susan Doan about.
Yeah.
And because she had gone and tried to blow the whistle.
Yeah. In fact, one of not my first conversation, but maybe my second conversation with them, they said, how many people have you told about this? And I said, well, just a few. They said, well, you need to be careful. They're very dangerous. And in my mind, I was like, you guys carry guns. What do you mean they're dangerous? I know they're dangerous, but like, you're telling me they're dangerous? So it was very interesting that they'd known for that long.
Yeah.
But we were lucky to get, the perfect prosecutor. Moira Penza was the perfect prosecutor. She wanted this case very badly once she read about it. And the team was incredible. And so, yeah, he's now languishing in prison for the rest of his life. He's trying everything to get out.
I've seen his efforts. They seem pretty lame.
They are.
They seem pretty lame. He still has, now if I have this right, he still has a couple of people still supporting him. Is that true?
I would say there's there's 5 that are very public. I'd say there's probably another 15 that are not public but support him. So the hardcore supporters, I'd say there's probably like 20 of them.
Wow.
And then I think there's a few more sort of, maybe there's another 20, that like, still think maybe the mistakes were made. And, because basically he's been saying the FBI lied. That's what he's been telling everybody. They fudged the evidence, which I can tell you right now, they did not.
Right.
They did not mess with the evidence. It was a very good case.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a bunch of them that still...
You would know. You literally documented almost all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the one thing about... Because people sometimes say, well, why were you shooting so much? Obviously, inside I was shooting because that was kind of my job. But what happened is the minute I realized what was going on, I realized that the next thing that was going to happen is they were going to try and frame me for crimes. And so the reason I was shooting everything and recording everything was because I felt at some point the cops are going to pull up and arrest me because they're going to make up some bullshit because they have the resources to make it happen.
Right.
If I record everything, then I can show them, no, this is what actually happened. And so I was making notes and I was recording and timestamps and everything because I thought that the beginning of what turned into the vow was basically me just collecting evidence in real time to prove that they were lying.
Oh, so your projects, maybe I misunderstood. Did it start with the idea of documenting Keith and the positivity and goodness of the group and then become that?
It started that way. That was what I was doing. I was thinking, like we all do when we're in a cult, like the leader's great. The leader's misunderstood. Let me just document everything and try and, create things so people can see who this really is. Right. I had no intention of, ever doing anything with it outside of that. That was the idea. Now it's funny, in court, the defense attorneys tried to suggest that I had embedded myself for a decade, to do this, like I was being a double agent, which is complete and utter bullshit.
For 10 years to get Keith? Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Can you imagine the level of patience? I don't have that patience. Let me tell you, I do not have that patience at all. But the way the vow season 1 opens, with me talking to camera, that's me basically documenting everything that's happening and then starting to record phone calls. And the phone calls between, Bonnie and I and Sarah and I and a bunch of different people. I was just trying to document everything because I thought these guys are going to like try and get us. And attempts were made. I mean, there was an attempt made at one point. It didn't work out very well, but Claire Bronfman, was trying to get her legal team to get Bonnie and I arrested in Los Angeles. White collar crimes, made up white collar crimes.
Wow.
And we were getting wind of this because we had somebody inside the legal team telling us what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's the usual mafia stupid tactics,
Well, it is, isn't it? Isn't it?
It's the same tactics.
And
also you think, when you're inside, and I don't know if you felt this way because you were in the Sea Org, right?
I was. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're inside, you kind of think that you really are smarter than everybody else.
Yes.
And like you know shit they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So when I woke up and got out, I began to realize they're going to do some stupid shit. All we have to do is try to like document what they're doing.
Right.
Right. Which is sometimes not that hard because they really think that like everybody else is stupid. Like to this day, Raniere still believes that, the judge just didn't understand.
Wow.
Like he tried to reach out to me. I think it was maybe 2 years right now. He tried to reach out to me from prison.
Really?
Yeah. And he was trying to get me to tell the judge that I'd made a mistake.
Wow.
Yeah.
After everything that went down, he really thought that was going to work.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's, as you know, it's this bizarre messianic complex.
Mm-hmm.
And they live in another reality altogether, which is so interesting. I wanted to say this to you because you're all about logic and critical thinking.
Yeah.
And it's funny because inside, Raniere was teaching us logic
mm-hmm.
and teaching us critical thinking. So in a certain compartmentalized area of reality, we had those skills.
Mm-hmm.
You just couldn't question him.
Exactly. And let me tell you, L. Ron Hubbard was exactly the same.
Really?
He set up, this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but there is a series of writings L. Ron Hubbard put together in the early 70s, which are called the Data Series of Issues. They're policy letters. The Data Series. So it's a series of issues about data, how to parse, analyze, and understand data and information and statistics and situations and figure out why something is happening the way that it is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and reinforce the good or correct the bad. And this whole system is called data evaluation, and it is a whole process that is used by Scientology management that I was trained in. And this is how Scientologists convince themselves they know how to think.
Yeah, but was it like sound reasoning? Was it good logic?
Oh no, I've taken it apart. It was a reasoning system that looked and sounded impressive and gave everybody who was trained in it the idea that they had an analytical ability to spot the source of problems more quickly and easily than anybody else. But what it really is a system of confirmation bias to target an individual and blame them for the entire situation.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Those assholes.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time. Before I forget, one of the other things I wanted to tell you is there were a few things that we were watching as we were sort of waking up, and one of them was Scientology in the Aftermath.
Yes. Cool.
Yeah, which I think you were a consultant on that, weren't you?
I was, and I got to be in it a couple of times too. It was a great a great experience.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And honestly, I was, watching that stuff like April, May, 2017, and because Bonnie was saying to me, watch this. Yes. And I was watching that and saying, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's my obsession with patterns. That's why I'm so obsessed with looking at patterns.
Yeah,
because these kinds of things happen, we can get into this in a while, but these things happen, from intimate relationships all the way up to entire countries.
That's right.
I think that we have to learn the patterns,
I could not agree with you more. And I have been doing the exact same. search and discovery to figure this out from a psychological perspective, right? How do we think our way into this? How do we think our way out of it? Or can we? And what does that, for me, it's been the intersection of rationality, emotional needs, and moral foundations. And those three things come together to sort of determine how we're going to act or behave. That's my framing of the whole thing.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the same mission.
Exactly. And that's why I've been wanting to hook up with you for so long, because I could see that. And I've so admired your work on this for so long, because you've been so calm and rational and just kind of dedicatedly one step after another, and you're really kind of taking your time, putting it out there and figuring it out and putting out really high quality content. So that's what I've been so impressed by as in your post-cult life.
Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been this obsession to try to, I guess, defrag my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things, so there's sort of two projects that I'm doing right now. The one project I'll finish this year, it's called Empathy Not Included. It's about narcissism, narcissistic abuse, malignant narcissism, that kind of thing. And that started in 2019, I think it was. Bonnie had said to me, you need to make a film about narcissism. Mm-hmm. You need to make a film about this because people need to understand the pathology. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a good point. And so I began, actually continue doing as much research as I could, because I realized that there's all these different words for things, in different contexts. Like in business, the person's called this thing. In the relationship, they're called an abuser. And I was realizing, but there's a pathology underlying all of these things.
Yes.
So that film we've been shooting for almost 2 years now, and we'll have that out at the end of this year. And then I'm also doing another a series, which it's kind of like The Vow. It's another cult. This time I get to take what I've learned and now work with other people who are, as you well know, deeply traumatized, deeply messed up.
Yeah.
I won't mention the particular cults at the moment, but we've been working on that for a while as well. That should come out next year. But my obsession has been looking at the patterns of all of these things at different scales. And I think because what happened with me is I began to realize that what Keith Raniere was doing with these women was like he was having these malignant, narcissistically abusive relationships with each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to realize, and then as the entire organization, we were in an abusive relationship with him. And then I began to realize, but this is what happens in corporations. And this is what happens, in all the different cults and religions and whatever that do that kind of thing. And eventually I realized, but this is what happens at a global scale.
That's right.
Coming from South Africa, when I look back and I realized the shit that was being done in South Africa, some of the authoritarian shit that happens, it's the same pattern.
That's right.
And it's usually there's somebody with the pathology, or maybe it's a group of people with some kind of pathology that are doing these things, that are seeking this control because of their, vapid emptiness that they have inside. They just desperately need to control and hurt other people.
That's
right.
How
it goes.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, let me ask you, because the documentaries and sort of the cult space, you could say, right, has really blown up in the last 10, 15 years.
Yes.
I don't know, my perspective being very Scientological, because that's where I came out of, I kind of frame everything through how Scientology was exposed and Anonymous blowing up in 2008, and then the escape of very prominent high-level Scientologists, Mike Rinder, Marty Rathman, Mark Headley, et cetera, and them speaking out in newspapers, and then going clear and Scientology in the aftermath. And this has really blown this up into the public space, followed by The Vow. And now we have practically movies of the week about cults of the week, because this is such a popular genre, similar to true crime.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that as an ex-cult member in terms of the, I think it's good for the exposure, but I also have concerns about the misunderstandings or sensationalism that sometimes can overtake the messaging. But how do you see it?
I feel the same way. I think that the upside is people get to see a pattern play out in front of them on their television screen.
Yeah.
And it really helps them. Like the amount of people that have seen The Vow that have reached out to all of us said, oh my God, I watched The Vow and then I realized I was in this thing, or I used to be in that thing, or whatever it is. I think the problem that I see, there's a couple of problems I see. The one is what I call cult porn.
There we go. I call it trauma porn.
Yeah. No, same thing.
Yep.
You know, because people are sort of watching often your worst moments. And you know, and we decided, like, just crack our chest open, let it all hang out. People have to see how this works.
Yep.
And it was a deeply vulnerable experience. And I mean, honestly, for almost 3 years, just cameras all the time.
Yep.
I think that the where I see problems, and this is a really big problem, is that some of the messaging sometimes is, look at these insanely crazy, stupid, dumb people.
Yep.
It would never happen to me.
Yep.
And so when certain, you know, cult shows or compilation shows are made, they always choose the ones with the craziest looking people, the craziest leaders. And they don't seem to understand, like Keith Raniere presented himself like Mr. Rogers, you know?
Really?
Like really kind and sweet and everything. And, you know, you don't see that as much in The Vow because you see some of the crazy shit.
Yeah. But
he really, I mean, his ability to connect with people, to mirror them, and to have them feel like they were the most important person in the room. He came across with such kindness. And if you don't understand what love bombing is, or you don't understand how these people present themselves, you know, you're going to fall for it. So the issue I have with these shows is they show sometimes the really crazy shit.
Yes.
And it's interesting because it's very exciting. That's insane, you know, and it's, you know, you really, as a filmmaker, you can get people really riled up and fascinated. But like as a tool to actually help people, I think you have to get people to see the pattern. So my concern is sometimes that people think, oh, well, it could never happen to me. And they think somehow that you would know a cult because you would arrive and they'd be doing terribly destructive things.
Yep.
They don't realize that's not what happens. That shit comes later.
That's right.
You know, that shit comes later. Like first you get like love bombed and these are the most amazing people I've ever met. And these are my people and they really get me. And oh my God, they're so supportive. And like, they really want to help humanity and yada, 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 yada. And then eventually, bit by bit by bit, you get to the point that you're fucked.
And
then you start to see the evil.
That's right.
But then you say it's evil, but they say that's not evil. Your morality is messed up. We're going to fix your morality. You know, you know how it goes.
Oh yeah.
But I think that's the one concern I have, and I know it's a big thing right now. I think, you know, this whole true con genre. And look, you know, I'm doing something like, well, I'm doing a true con piece as well. But the thing that I'm doing is I'm looking very deeply at the pathology, you know, of the people involved. Their background as well, like how they get to be like this, you know, and taking a very, very deep dive into the victims and survivors' stories in a very, very deep way. And I hope, you know, I'm not doing cult porn. I hope. I don't think I am.
I doubt that you are, because you and I and most people who come out of cults get it, because we literally lived it. And there is nothing quite like the experience of having to reset your entire life, because everything you've been surrounding yourself with and all of the values and truths that you were literally clinging to were false, were completely wrong. And not only wrong, but destructively wrong.
Yes.
That's a mind-blowing moment. And I still, 10 years later, haven't found the right words to describe that moment in time. How do you describe it? What was your moment?
Do you mean the wake up moment?
That moment.
So the way I describe it is, I use Stranger Things, the TV show, as a metaphor. I describe it as waking up in the upside down. For those of, you know, the audience that doesn't know, like Stranger Things, there's two parallel worlds, the normal world and the upside down world. But you wake up one day suddenly in the upside down and realize, I thought this was normal, but you're upside down and you're inside out and you're backwards. And now you have to get back into the normal world that it's the most bizarre thing. It's like your psyche got turned inside out. And when you wake up and you see the level of evil that's happening, it's so extraordinary. It's such a mind fuck. And there's also the aspect of moral injury, you know, which is that you went along with certain things that, like, now you look back and go, that was insane. Yes. It was insane that I thought that. It was insane that I thought that was okay. And all because, you know, we all wanted to improve. We all wanted to be better. You know, okay, so yeah, I'll plank for 5 minutes, you know, because that'll help me do this, or I'll do whatever, or I'll, you know, go stand in this, you know, in the snow and, you know, barefoot for however long because blah, blah, whatever the thing is.
That's right.
So for me, it's the upside down. You wake up in the upside down, and the shock is you thought that was normal. And then, as you know, the path back to the normal world, which the path back to the normal world physically can happen pretty fast. But then it's the slow defragging, yes, you know, back out. And there's all these fears, you know, and I see that with people that have left cults, or at least recently left cults. They have this terror that the cult leader can read their mind, that they know things about them, you know. And I have to say, no, the cult leader's a fucking idiot. And doesn't have any of those abilities. They've just basically data mined you for so long that they know so much about you.
That's right.
That's what they're using. It's a magic trick, you know?
That's right.
But yeah, it's the best way I could describe it to somebody that doesn't understand how a cult works, that part of it anyway, is saying, imagine that the person you love, your husband or your wife, you find out that they're a serial killer and have been for 20 years.
Right.
That's right. The level of shock.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah, that's
a good way of putting it. I agree with all of that. Yeah. I like that. Mm-hmm. The upside down. Because you do have to, it's a journey making your way back. And it's interesting to me to see the individuality of response. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to help everybody, but you come to realize, as we mentioned earlier, there's still 20 people believing in Keith. Even now, even with everything that's come out, and you realize, you know, like when you're in the cult, you're trying to reach everybody, and when you're out of the cult, you're trying to reach everybody, and you come to realize we're not going to reach everybody. We can do what we can do, you know. Yeah,
but it took me a while, you know.
Yeah,
like,
me too.
I remember because I was, you know, I was spending a lot of time with the FBI, and Bonnie was there at times as well. I was kind of living in that building for a while. And, you know, I would sometimes say, like, I'm trying to get so-and-so out. I'm trying to get so-and-so out. And they would look at me. At one point, the two agents, you know, walked me out of the building. They said, you know, listen, with all those indictments that are out now, I mean, if they haven't woken up now, they're never waking up. And I'm like, no, that's not true. And they said, I'm telling you, it's true.
Yeah.
And it was very hard for me to swallow.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I finally got to the point. It was actually Leah Remini. She was actually the one that finally helped me. She said, listen, for some people, they shouldn't wake up because it might be too much. Just let them go. And it was such an interesting thing she said to me.
Wow, you know? That's a really powerful statement because it's actually totally true.
It's totally true. And you know what happened after that? I was doing a podcast with Mike and Leah. And she said it on the podcast. And after that podcast, my back went out and I couldn't move for like 2 weeks.
Oh, no.
And I feel like somehow it was related to what she said. Finally, like putting the weight down that it was my responsibility somehow to get everybody out. And many of us felt this, you know, all of us. I mean, Nippy, Sarah, Bunny, we all felt it at some point.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where you're like, I just can't anymore, you know? Because it's also not good for you after a while, right?
That's right.
I think.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I'm 10 years out, and I'm you know, moving in a wider direction now. And I've said this so many times to people. I mean, probably sick of hearing it, but I just have to keep announcing it because for me, it's kind of reminding myself, you know, when I'm talking out loud, I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to my audience, that there comes a point where in a way I've had to kind of repeatedly remind myself to give myself permission that it's okay to move on, that it's okay
Yes.
that there are going to be people who are going to be stuck there or trapped there. And I've done everything I know how to do. I've
Right.
produced all the content I know how to produce. I've said everything there is to say. Other people have things to say. Please do. You know, other channels, other content, whatever. But for me, you know, when I first got out, how did you feel about this? When I first got out, I said to my mom, who was my main support person at the time, I really leaned heavily on family because they had gotten out. And I said to her, if I'm still doing this in a year, when I first started making my first videos, I said, if I'm still doing this in a year, I want you to stop me. I want you to shoot me, right? I can't keep talking about Scientology after a year. This is after having been in for 30 plus years, right?
Wow.
So after a year, I had just gotten started and I had just really gotten going on downloading. And I realized recovery was probably going to be a much longer process than a year. And now it's been 10 years and I really think I'm there, you know, as far as being able to move on. How has this been for you?
I think where there were two things that happened. You know, 2017 was the wake up, but you know, I remember Yanya Lalich and I were having a conversation at one point, and she said, you know, you can't heal when you're an activist. And I said, I get it, but he's still out there doing that shit, you know, and he hadn't even been arrested at this point. And I said, that healing is going to have to come later. And she was right. For 2 years, it was just, you know, constant war and like, there was no healing. After the trial, which was June 2019. So 2 years later, when he was found guilty, he hadn't been sentenced yet. I had a complete and utter collapse. I was so messed up. My nerves are just shot. And only then, at the end of 2019, could I start really, like, Bonnie and I both started really embracing healing. But we were super messed up. And so in 2020, when I really started to feel like I need to start like moving my projects forward, I realized I don't want to be talking about NXIVM forever. You know, the same way you feel, but I'm really interested in the pattern of these things. Right. I'm really interested in studying about authoritarianism, which we were studying inside, by the way, as well. We were studying Lifton's work and a whole bunch of things inside, you know.
Really? You were straight up reading Lifton while you were in NXIVM? Wow. Wow.
Yes. If that isn't messed up, I don't know what is.
Boy, it's certainly a display of cognitive dissonance, I'll tell you that.
It's extraordinary. Wow. It's extraordinary. And it was this weird kind of inoculation, because it was like, by studying all these things, you were being inoculated, because it was like, well, we're not doing this. We're studying it so we don't do it. Right. I mean, that the level of evil is extraordinary. But there came a point I realized that because when the vow came out, everybody wanted to talk. So many people wanted to talk. And I was just like, I don't have the bandwidth. I can't do this. Like, and it was almost like people were expecting me now that you've already spent 12 years of your life doing that, and now that you've had this war for like over 2 years, now give us more of your time. And I was like, I just can't. Yeah. But what I could do is really start to look at my projects that I wanted to make, that I've been sitting on for a while. And the narcissism thing sort of started to become this burning obsession to make the film about that. And it's been actually very healing, because in this film, I've interviewed 4 self-confessed either narcissists or sociopaths or psychopaths. I've had lengthy conversations with people with these pathologies. And in some ways, it's been very healing, because I've been able to ask the questions and get the answers that I could never get from Raniere.
Oh, how wonderful. Capable. Of course.
Isn't that weird? Isn't that strange? Yeah. Yeah, because they'll tell me straight up, you know. I mean, they'll tell me about like the awful things they do to people and why they do it and what their internal emotional, there's not a lot of emotion, but there's some, what their internal architecture is like, what their reasoning is like. Yeah. And so it's helped me make sense of a lot of things. And then I began to think, if I can show other people how these people work, two things will happen. First, I can get past the wall of denial that people have of like evil doesn't exist, because it does.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I can help them feel sane, because the as you know, there's this feeling of insanity, because they've turned your whole world upside down. And if you're never going to get an apology ever, because you're the problem, not them.
That's right.
But if you can start to understand what you're dealing with a certain kind of AI, a certain mechanism. If you can understand what you're dealing with, I found for myself, I started to feel more sane, and I found for people that I've helped in different ways, they start to go, oh, that's what's going on. That's how they work. You have to get people, as you know, to stop thinking that like who I am, they're like me. They're not.
Right. That's right.
They're not.
That's right.
They don't give a shit. You're a chess piece.
Exactly.
You're a toaster. You're like a refrigerator. Like you're whatever. They're not like you. And if you can get people to separate that out, it's a very sweet, childlike thing. This projecting all of your attributes on the world.
Yes.
You can start to separate that out.
That's right.
There's a kind of a growing up that happens. It's painful, but there's a growing up that happens, and you realize, oh, I am this way and they are that way, and that's very, very different, you know.
Yes.
So for me, just to answer the long answer to your question is, you know, for me, that my sanity and sort of my creative spirit has been reinvigorated, because I'm now using my craft, which I love filmmaking, but I'm using it in a way that I feel is more beneficial than just talking about NXIVM forever, because I will still talk about it because it's a great example of the pattern.
Exactly. That's exactly how I think about Scientology now. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, Scientology to me is so interesting because, and I feel this deep sadness because there has been very little resolution for people that have left. Yeah. But the whistleblowers, there's very little resolution, and the fight has been long and it's still going on. And we were very lucky.
That's right.
It is almost unheard of what happened with us, that we got justice. It's almost unheard of.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I feel a certain sadness because the fight is long, you know?
But
I was thinking about, like, for instance, what you do is, you know, you're beyond just Scientology. You're teaching people, you know, how to think critically, how to look at certain things, you know, which is what people desperately need. Desperately.
Yeah. Tell me about it. I agree with everything you've just said. I have so many questions. I guess I first wanted to comment on the pattern includes a very interesting bit that I wanted to throw by you and see what you think about this. You mentioned love bombing earlier and highlighted it because it's such an important point of cult recruitment and retention, because they will just do it again and again and again. And this is the trauma bonding we talk about, where it's rewards as well as penalties. And when you need the rewards, you get the rewards, but just enough to keep you on the edge and keep you involved. Another term a classmate of mine used for love bombing is manipulative kindness, which I find to be a perfect descriptor of it. Yeah. And it feels to me like these predatory, narcissistic personalities, and I have questions for you about the interviews you've done, seem to target empaths. Seem to target people who are empathic, and as what John Atack and I have called this is weaponized empaths. You weaponize them as cult members, because there is no one who will work harder for you, actually die for you, than someone who actually likes people, wants people to get along, wants to have people succeed, and believes that this narcissist's methodology is the way to accomplish that. And that's the 180 weirdo, stupid thing that happens, that if you could get that empath to see, it's when the empath wakes up to the fact that they're hurting people, that their moral foundations kick in and they realize, I'm the bad guy. Oh my God. That's exactly what I've never wanted to be. And that's what forces the reevaluation. Whereas if we were all narcissists, we would never be forced to reevaluate our position or
Yes.
morality or actions because we would take pleasure in hurting people. But empaths
Yes.
only take pleasure in hurting people when they think they're doing the good for the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about, what do you think about all that?
I mean, I think that's generally true. I think it's people, maybe it's empaths. I think it's definitely people that are idealistic.
There we go. That would be another term for it.
Slightly broader for me. Like idealistic people are unfortunately very easy to play.
Yes.
And it's very damaging, in politics as well, because most people, vote for things that are not good for them, but they're sold idealism. They're sold something beautiful.
That's right.
So I generally really agree with you. I think there's another thing though, and I saw this in NXIVM, that certain people that came in had pathologies. They were narcissistic, and some of them had NPD.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, of course.
And they were desperate for attention, and he gave them power.
Right.
And it was like a drug to them.
Right.
And some of the people that are still in prison right now are like that. It was like he gave them so much power. He put them in the position of generals. And it was interesting. I don't, first of all, I'm used to power because, on a film set, it's run in a very militaristic way. So that was never a thing for me. That never appealed to me. Raniere had to get me on something else. And he had to get me on morality, on goodness, on the things that I really cared about. And we would have arguments about that, especially towards the end. But I do think that generally speaking, I really don't believe that the people that are targeted are broken people necessarily, because I think that people think that. I think there are people like everybody else that's yearning for something beautiful.
Yeah.
And the narcissist or sociopath or psychopath or whatever it is, if they have enough knowledge about how that works, all they have to do is represent the thing the person most wants in life and have them believe that this is it. And usually they do believe it because it doesn't occur to the sensitive, empathic person to lie.
Right.
They just not like that. They're just not going to, be maybe little white lies here and there because they're uncomfortable. They want to say how uncomfortable, whatever it is, but never the complete flat out fucking lie.
That's right.
They're never going to do that. And so they assume that what they're hearing is true. In fact, one of my first exit counselors, when I started waking up, she said to me, because I said, well, he says this and he says that and he says the other. And she said, look at what he does, not what he says.
That's right.
And that to me was staggering. I was like, what he does? Because I literally believed what he said he meant, because when I say something, I fucking mean it.
Exactly. That's right? That projection again.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And when I looked at what he does, I'm like, right, what he does is not the same. And she would say to me, have you noticed over the years, was there stuff he said that was different than what he did? I said, yes. And this was like this staggering realization to me.
Yeah.
But I do think that empathic people have this, I wouldn't call it a weakness. I think it's an idealism that makes them susceptible, because they're, nowhere are you trained. It's funny, I deal with that in the film that I'm going to release. Nowhere are you trained about these pathologies. Even some therapists, even some psychologists, some psychiatrists are not well trained.
That's right.
Maybe you spend half a day on, discussing narcissism, when they go to school, but no one's trained in how this works. And so they get away with it time and time again. And so for me, the obsession is trying to help people understand how it works in an entertaining way.
Exactly. You want to make it entertaining, informative, and educational. my three.
Which is not easy, but I think I'm very happy with where we've gotten with this film we're going to release at the end of the year. But it's pretty cool, because you have to figure out, well, how do I give them a story and how do I give them a lot of information?
Yep.
And not too much that their brain shorts out,
That's right. That's right.
But I think this film is the kind of film that people will want to go see more than once, probably, I hope.
Excellent.
I think it will be that kind of film.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to it. Let me ask you, in interviewing these people one-on-one direct like this, what was the biggest surprise for you?
Some of it was just their unashamed admission of things.
Mm.
And then some of it was recognizing that not in all cases, that there's one gentleman who is a complete psychopath, no anxiety, whatever, a little different with him. But for the others, they're basically underdeveloped children. They're little children, just never grew up. At a certain point, they stop growing and they just give in to a whole bunch of impulses. That was surprising to me. That I didn't expect, because I think I had this, because Raniere was this sort of intellectual specter of a whatever. I never saw Raniere as a little child until I woke up, and then I was like, oh my God. Like I remember when, in the vow, you see, we go off to India to go meet the Dalai Lama, right? And I remember we took we drove in the middle of the night to like a private airstrip somewhere near Saratoga Springs, and we took a private jet to New York, and then from New York we flew to like Heathrow, and then from Heathrow to India. And I remember, because I was with Raniere and a few other people, he couldn't do anything. He couldn't handle his passport. He couldn't handle his ticket. It's like he'd never gone through TSA in his life, and he was like a little boy. And me, with my sweetness, was like, oh, that's so sweet. He's like a little monk that has no real life experience. He's so internal and so like loving and trying to figure out how to help people, and he doesn't have a lot of experience. And later I was like, motherfucker, he used to fly. He just like organized his life in such a way that he was so helpless. He barely ever drove himself. I mean, sometimes if I'd meet him, sometimes I'd have to drive him, I'd have to go pick him up, But I think this big surprise for me was how underdeveloped some of these people are. They can be intellectually very smart, strategically very, very clever. But they're very underdeveloped. And once you know what you're looking at, it's such a pattern. You can see so clearly what they're doing. They think they're brilliant, which is it's quite scary, because when I look back at it now, I realize, well, part of what happens in a cult is, you are sort of inducted into a kind of narcissism, because you are made to think that you are special and wonderful and amazing, and you believe it.
That's right.
And that's not good. That is very, very unhealthy. When you wake up, you realize like, oh, I don't know shit.
That's right.
And that's such a good thing to wake up to. Like, I don't know shit. All the shit I thought I knew, I don't know shit. And so, I mean, for me, I threw everything out. Everything I thought I knew about psychology, mysticism, spirituality, I threw everything out. I decided that all the great saints were all assholes. Jesus was a narcissist. Buddha was probably a sociopath. I was like just going after everything. But I recognize at the time, even it was a phase. So it's taken me a certain amount of time to begin to reintegrate some of those things in a very, very careful way. Right. But I had to throw everything out. But yeah, the long answer was just that those were the things that surprised me about about these people with these pathologies, and one other thing, which is their level of certainty. They are so certain of what they're saying. So certain. It's like, and listen, most politicians, I believe, are on the spectrum, because they say shit that they're lying. They're lying, but they say it with such confidence.
Yep.
That you go like, I mean, there's no way you could say it with that confidence and be lying. No, you can. Just, not in your architecture, but in theirs, they can.
And that's the credibility we give them, is because we see an attitude and a way of speaking and a way of even presenting that is convincing, and it's calculatingly so. That individual is calculating their appearance and their speech, and they've even practiced in front of mirrors. I mean, they really, some of these people really, really work on this. And that certainty point becomes, and I'll relate it back in terms of Scientology, which, by the way, Hubbard literally described as the science of certainty early on.
Really?
That trait and the other traits that these people, these narcissistic predators are presented in such a way that you want to be like them. They are admirable and you want to copy them. You want to live a life that you believe they are living. And you want to present the way they are presenting because you find it so intellectually stimulating or emotionally satisfying or beautiful to look upon or whatever. I think that's very much part of the package, and that's what these personality types have somehow come to realize is their path to success, is if they do these things.
Yeah. I was thinking about, and I don't like to mention people, by name, but I will. I was thinking about Tom Cruise,
Oh, yeah.
The guy's a mega star.
Yep.
And,
legit.
And he has a level of confidence that seems extraordinary. Now, once I woke up and I looked at that, I thought, I think I know what that confidence is. There's a lot of stuff missing in there.
Yep.
A lot.
Yep.
And there's very few emotions in there that are portrayed, but there's a level of certainty that can feel intoxicating, And this is the danger about filmmaking. You make something like, you make these heroes, like whether it be female or male, and they just seem so sure of themselves. You're like, I want to be like that. And I hate those kinds of characters. I prefer the characters that have some fatal flaw and you realize, oh my God, they're going to fuck up at some point,
Yeah.
Now, I hope they fuck up. And then if they overcome that, that's amazing. I prefer those kinds of characters.
Yep.
But when I look at Tom Cruise, Raniere taught in the acting curriculum that he taught, he said, you don't worry about feeling things. Just figure out the architecture of what you need to do that represents an emotion. Like, what does sadness look like? What happens with your face with sadness? And so he was teaching this sort of not inside out acting style, but sort of the outside in. Just show them a certain architecture of your body and your face, and they'll feel the emotion. And so when I began to wake up, I realized, he's teaching acting that way because he doesn't have those emotions.
Bingo. That's right.
And so when I look at certain actors, and Tom Cruise is one of those actors. It's very intense. The man runs intensely. And listen, I went to see Top Gun. I liked it so much. I went to see it again. I really liked it. But I watched the acting style. I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of training. A lot of training. And it's such good training that people mistake it for actual emotion.
I completely agree.
I hope I don't offend anybody with me saying that, but
you shouldn't be, because I think what you're saying is 100% accurate. You're describing exactly the behavioral characteristics of these predators, and these are I gravitate towards that word, since narcissism is, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel it's so grossly overused at this point.
It's just,
So
no, it really is.
Yeah. So I've had to.
If somebody disagrees with you, you call them a narcissist.
Exactly.
No. It's a very specific pathology.
That's right. And it's much deeper than he's a little egotistical, or she cons some people sometimes. It's a way more deep pathology than that. In fact, we're actually sort of circling around the architecture of it right now, because certainty and a lack of stages of development in the mind and psychology has everything to do with this, because you're dealing with adult children who are absolutely positive that every thought and idea and action that they want to take part in is absolutely the pure, right, 100% thing that needs to be done. And anybody who gets in my way, I'm just going to roll them over.
Yes, it's so true. And I see that I see that in sort of leadership, in different countries. And I'm not going to single out specific countries and stuff, because honestly, the one gift, my dad was in intelligence, and so he was a spy basically. And he said to me, things are not the way you think they are, like you think all these people are against each other. They're all working with each other in different ways. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And then later I realized he was right. But I see world leaders, I see them as children.
Yeah.
They get up in front of the camera and they're so certain. And some of them are so full of shit,
Exactly.
And we have this thing in inside of us. And this is Raniere was very smart with this. The reason Raniere wanted to do videos was because he told Nancy Salzman that there's something about seeing something on a television screen that you immediately are awestruck. It's larger than life, and it taps into something very primitive. And I think he was right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing happens with us, with our TV screens and our movie screens, and now even our phones. We see these things, and we think they're legitimate. And like I was a news cameraman for a while in South Africa, and I mean, I would shoot things, and they'd end up in the news, and they'd be lying about what happened. And I began to realize, like, we have to get more educated. And I don't know that this is going to be my thing in life, but I really want people to understand how media works.
Yeah.
And how it's really seductive.
Yep.
Really seductive. And put aside, well, this network is better than that network. They're designed to make money. They're all doing something.
That's right.
Never mind what political party you're in. It's all full of shit. It's very hard to get real news at this point.
That's right.
But it's very, very seductive. And you need to start to study, what do these people look like? And some of them, they're so well lit. They're so coiffed, and maybe the guys have a square jaw and the women have a certain look, and they have the same plastic surgeon that, gets them to look a certain way. And it feels like, well, they know. And I keep saying to people, this is not like, the 50s, this is not like, things have changed,
Yep.
You're looking at glamour.
That's right.
Anyway, this is one of my rants. I don't know what I'm going to, I don't think it's my thing in life to try to train people about this, but on my podcast, sometimes I talk about some of this stuff,
Absolutely. Well, there's no way to avoid it for us, because once your eyes are opened and once you realize, and by my eyes opened, I don't mean I have some higher awareness than other people are capable of. That's not at all the point. The point is you become aware when your eyes are open as a cult member to how, well, basically how stupid you can be, how connable or how open to suggestion you can be. That's what you realize.
Yes.
You don't realize how better you are. You realize how vulnerable you are. And you realize how vulnerable everybody is who are not these personality types we're talking about, because they're not vulnerable. They're predators. We are their prey. And we make ourselves open to being their prey quite organically, because we have something they don't have. Compassion, empathy, the concept that other people are important, not just tools to be used, as you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
These are fundamental principles of different types of personalities that we tend to not really recognize because of this projection you mentioned. We project ourselves onto everybody we meet. So the education I think we're trying to present to people is, hey, you really got to understand there are people out there who aren't like you, and you're vulnerable to them because of your very nature. It has nothing to do with your politics, your religious beliefs, your spirituality, or lack of it. None of that has anything to do with what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That I
there's
think
something
is,
something you raised, which is, you wake up and you realize, oh my God, how could I be so wrong?
Yep.
And there's a tendency to want to now find security and go like, well, now I've been, like, what do they say, red pilled?
Yeah.
So now I know how everything's working. No, you don't.
That's right.
Like, just be humble.
That's
like,
right.
Just be humble about it. Like, because I see some people sometimes, some of the anti-cult people, there's a certain certainty they have now, and they know everything. I'm like, no, you don't.
That's right.
You're just a human being like the rest of us, with all these different foibles that we all have. The greatest thing that happened to me when I woke up, from this cult business, and I really hit rock bottom. I mean, I hit rock bottom, and I was busy writing, and I was going to this writing group, and I remember writing one day, like, just about how rock bottom I felt. And then I noticed, like, but I'm feeling so much. And I was thinking, holy shit, this is amazing. I am finally feeling a level of failure I've never allowed myself to feel. And I know failure isn't a feeling, but you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And for the first time in my life, because I think I used spirituality as a balm, as a way to bypass everything. For the first time in my life, I truly felt like I could connect to the human condition, and realize like, oh, everybody feels this. This is the feeling I've been terrified of, So in some ways, waking up, hitting rock bottom, and before the attempted resurrection, it was just like, I'm fucked. And the only thing I know is I got to put this guy away. I'll do anything I can. I'll do whatever to put this guy away. That's all I knew. And I felt bad. I felt my nervous system was messed. I felt like such a failure. I've wasted 12 years of my life. There were all these thoughts I had, but I was feeling deeply, and that's the thing that they don't want you to do inside most cults. They don't want you to feel deeply.
That's right. In fact, it's been posited. I wanted to get your opinion on this, especially now that you've done these interviews where you have more insight into the cult leader, predator psyche. There's a theory out there that I think it's Hassan's, but it might be based on earlier work, about cult personality, about how the cult leader sort of injects or throws or creates mini-me's within the cult. Everybody's kind of trying to become the cult leader. It's a very workable theory as far as I'm concerned. I think it makes a lot of sense in that there's a codependent relationship that's established. The leader needs the followers as much as the followers need the leader. And and the entire basis of the relationship is we want to be more like this guy because he's our ascended master. He's the source of wisdom for us. Wouldn't I want to become him? And so we take on their personality traits to the point where even in Scientology, we would ask ourselves, what would Ron do in this situation? Not what should I do in this situation based on Ron. It's what would Ron do? That's what I need to do. Was there a similar thing in NXIVM?
Yes, there was, very much. It's almost exactly like that. Yeah. First of all, he's the example that you want to be like.
Yeah.
And there's also there was so much pressure to be like him.
Oh, really?
When I came in, there was when I came in, I was like, well, don't you want to be more like him, or don't you think that his values or whatever? But he's the mind behind this philosophy, this education that you love so much. Maybe you should spend time studying him. It was this whole. They venerated him to the point that I was thinking, well, maybe he needs to be venerated, because everybody was saying it.
Right.
Everybody. And there's a certain expectation, whenever you. I feel like it's sort of like, when you're a school kid and you get to a new school, and at first maybe you're a shy, quiet kid, and what are the rules here?
Yeah.
I got to figure out the rules because I got to survive.
Yep.
It's the same in a group like this. You get in, you see people doing certain things. You think they're weird, but like that's what they're doing. And so you go, okay, well, I'll just make a note of that. I don't think I want to do that, but I don't want to say that. I'll make a note of that. But eventually you start becoming like that.
That's
right. There was a psychologist who wrote a book. I can't remember, something about mind mapping or brain mapping. I think he just died. But he wrote this book about when you interact with another person, you map their mind, you map their brain, you map their thinking, which is a pretty natural thing to do. You want to map them. And the problem comes when you map a sociopath's mind, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
Because you're not like that. So first of all, you start to map the mind, you start to kind of copy them, but it has terribly detrimental effects on you as well. Yeah. It's not quite what you were saying, but I'm just adding that thought to it, But I do think, I think about, some of the people in prison right now, that went in, with Raniere. I can't name the names, but one of them is like a mini him. Just cold and brutal and scary, and people are scared of them and scared when they get out.
Well, I did want to ask you about, if you're down, I did want to ask you about Nancy. Only in that I'm curious about your views at this point with the education and experience you've had now, and of course all those years of experience with her. And I spoke with Susan about her as well in some detail. because Nancy, to my point of view, seemed to be Keith's partner and chief enabler. And I'm wondering, am I seeing that accurately? She seems to have been all in and fully aware of everything that was going on and sort of sorted it in her mind that it all made sense. But am I accurate in assuming or thinking those things?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, and this is not new. I wrote, in my statement to her in court, which is on my website, I really lay into her.
Yeah, good.
And one of the things I talk about, is her love of power. One of the things I talk about in that letter is, that she was tasked to break me psychologically. And she did. And I said to her in the letter, I said, what kind of person walks around for weeks, months, and years afterwards telling everybody how you broke Mark Vicente?
Right.
Like, how do you say that with pride? Like it's a good thing.
Right.
Like, how do you do that? And I said to her at the very end, I think you need to be really curious about your own pathology and about the way you think, and because you should not be working with people. You should not be working with people's psyches. So I have a less charitable view of her. I think that, there's a certain kind of vulnerable narcissism where they feel sorry for themselves all the time. They can cry at the drop of a hat. And, they have all these little crying stushes, but you start to realize eventually when you know what you're looking at, they're not crying for you or a situation. They're crying for themselves.
Right.
And that's the difference.
Right.
I think you and I share the same view of her. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a very unsympathetic view of Nancy Salzman. I'm really sorry that she had such a short prison sentence, to be honest. That's sort of my take on it.
Look, at the same time, look, was she fooled? Yeah, she was fooled because he messed with her head so much. I mean, she, at the executive board meeting, she would fall asleep. And I said to her in 2016, I took a walk with her and I said to her, you're in an abusive relationship with him. And she was like, no. It's a pity I couldn't see the whole thing yet, but I was seeing pieces of it. I said, he's abusive to you. She's, no, he's not. I'm like, yes, he is. And she couldn't see it,
Right.
And I wrote a few letters to her to try to get her to see it. But I didn't have the whole picture yet, because every time I went to him to say, why do you treat her that way? He would basically say to what amounted to, you don't understand what people need. I do.
Right. Exactly. That's how we would deal with it in Scientology as well when we were questioned about things, is you simply don't understand. In fact, if there is, it seems to me in the public eye, at least, or when dealing with critics or dealing with people who don't like Scientology or don't like cults, the number one refrain is, well, if you understood it, then you'd think differently. You just don't understand what we're doing here. And and true enough, in that no one in Scientology understands what L. Ron Hubbard is trying to do. There are occult things going on there. I mean, the bottom of that well is deep and so bizarre, you would never, ever see it within the Scientology bubble,
Yeah, just an aside, you're familiar with the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster?
Oh yeah.
Yes. I love that whole church, that whole movement.
Yep.
The noodly appendage. I love it because it's such the perfect metaphor for the absolute stupidity of some of the beliefs.
That's right.
Some, I'm not saying all religions, but certainly in some.
Yep.
I love, because it's like, oh my God, there it is. There's the stupidity right there.
That's right. That's right. They wear colanders on their head.
Yes. What are they? The Pastafarians, right?
The Pastafarians. That's right. Well, let me move toward wrapping up by asking you about this, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I definitely want to talk to you again, just so you know.
We'll do it. We'll do it again. Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this. I wanted to ask if maybe, I don't want to spoil what you have coming, obviously, but I am curious about one thing. Did you see or find or note any hope for change in your interviews or work with or study in narcissism?
Change in the people that had the pathologies?
Yes.
No.
I didn't think so, because I don't see
No,
it as a personality that ever feels compelled to
no,
change.
there's no reason to. I mean, they
Yeah.
say they do, they'll say they do, but there isn't. I mean, there was one therapist who I spoke to, she became a good friend of mine, and she believes they can change. And we've had, fun arguments about it. I said, I just don't see it. And she said, well, I've actually seen behavior changes. And I go, well, sorry to be cynical and I'm not a clinician, but like behavior changes are easy for them. They're
Right.
chameleons,
That's right.
So I don't see I don't see that it's possible. I've never, of all the people I've spoken to, they might even understand how they work. Some of them are very aware
Mm-hmm.
of what their different triggers are. They can describe this feeling of internal emptiness because at some point it didn't feel empty, and at some point they made a decision as children: fuck everybody, fuck this, fuck whatever it is, and they shut that down. So they have a memory of feeling more fullness, and now it feels empty. But I don't see that there's a reason for them to change because they're terrified of what it would feel like to feel vulnerability. I happen to think that vulnerability is beautiful now.
Yeah.
They are so pathologically afraid of losing power because they think that power is the only thing that they have.
Yeah.
They don't see power in deep feelings. And honestly, I don't know that they're capable of those feelings anymore, because I think what happens is when they start to approach them, because in my interviews, sometimes I would push some of these people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I would ask questions about what they're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and push some of them. For some, it would get to like, so would look like a complete breakdown, but I'm not sure. For some, it would provoke rage, you know,
Mm.
and for some can just even more dissociation, because they're all very dissociated.
That was something I was suspecting, was the disassociation, the
Yeah,
distancing
yeah,
from the feelings or the
yeah.
effects of what they're causing.
But I will tell you, and this is really interesting. So, in this film, it's called Empathy Not Included. I interview two brothers,
Mm.
and one is a self-confessed narcissist, and the other is not, and they're twin brothers.
Mm.
Same background, same upbringing, terrible upbringing, exactly the same, completely different people. And when you start to like really talk to them, and you try to ask them questions, you see that they took this very clear divergent path, where one dissociated completely, the other did to some degree as well, but developed a deep, deep care for other people because of the pain they felt. And then the
Huh.
one that became the narcissist, self-confessed, basically dissociated and just said, I'm never going to feel those things ever again. You know? And so it was great because we found like, oh, we don't have to have the whole nature versus nurture discussion.
Right.
We're just going to show these two characters, and the
Yeah.
audience gets to see it, right? Which is a very beautiful moment when you see like, oh my God, they're so different.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's fun things coming up in that film.
I
Fun things.
really look forward to seeing that. I'm glad you brought some twins to that. You've clearly given this one some thought, because that's quite
Yeah.
clever. Because
Yeah.
twin
Well,
studies are where
it
things
was an accident. It
really.
was by accident, by the way.
Oh, really?
I wasn't trying to. I was interviewing the guy one day, and he says, "Oh, and my twin brother." And I said, "Wait, you have a twin brother?" He goes, "Yeah." What's he like? He's not like me. But is he empathic? He goes, "He's very empathic." I'm like, "Oh, you know."
Perfect. 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 Yeah, the twin studies really blow things up. They really
Yeah.
show, on the nature nurture thing, they really
Yeah.
blow your assumptions out of the water. Twin studies are
Totally.
a whole genre you can look into. It's quite interesting in
Totally.
science.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well,
Yes.
Mark, let's go ahead and wrap up. But I not because I want
Yeah.
to. I could keep talking to you for another 2 hours, man. This
I
is
know we have lives to run as well. Yeah.
yeah.
But thank you. I mean, I honestly, it's been so great talking to you. And it's finally we're talking, because we've been liking each other's stuff on Twitter
Yep.
and Instagram, whatever it was.
Yep.
And I watched your stuff, and and as I said, with Aftermath, I mean, it really helped a lot. I'm telling you, it really helped. So
Good.
thank you for everything you did there. Really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. That's it. The only goal, man. It's getting us where we are so we can help other people and live a better life. So on that note, how do people find, contact, reach out, or whatever to connect with your materials? Your
I
website?
think the best Yeah, so my website is markvicente.com, markvicente.com. I couldn't even remember my spelling. I'm most active on Instagram, at Mark Vicente, also Twitter. Sometimes I spend time there, but most active on Instagram. And on my sort of bio, you can see a link to Empathy Not Included, which is where you'll get information about that film when it comes out towards the end of the year.
Perfect. Perfect. And you have a very impressive website. So I encourage people to check it out because there's a lot of stuff there, and you'll definitely get a deep dive into what Mark is all about.
And one more plug just quickly, because my podcast is also my YouTube channel, but I did an episode, which you may have seen, because what is a cult?
Mm-hmm.
And I go through like the 25 things that I think of in terms of what is a cult. And that's been an amazing resource for people. So if people want to check that out, it's kind of fun.
Absolutely. All right, folks, definitely check it out. And thanks for coming around and watching us gab on this week about this stuff. I hope it was interesting, informative, and educational as always. And I hope you will consider supporting the channel so that I can continue bringing you this work. And with that, we'll wrap up. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.